one of the many reasons why wine fraud has been able to be committed is because there is that ego involved. People don't want to admit they have been duped. Wine fraud today is really occurring top echelons now, and they tend to be male, rich. They don't want to be seen to be wrong. It takes a lot to come out and say, you know what, I have been duped. It makes you look a little stupid.
Spending thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on fake goods. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 255. Are you curious about the greatest con artists in the world of wine? What creative but illegal ingredients have been added to wine to cut costs and boost profits? And what is it about tales of crime and greed that draw us in? In today's episode, you'll hear the stories and tips that answer those questions in our chat with Rebecca Gibb, master of wine and author of the new book, Vintage Crime, A Short History of Wine Fraud. I'd like to give a shout out to Sprucewood Shores Estate Winery in Essex County for stocking my new book, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much, in their winery tasting room, and in doing so, supporting its message of hope, justice, and resilience. I'll put a link to their winery in the show notes. If you visit a winery or work at one, please encourage the owner or tasting room manager to stock the book. I'd also like to thank Dr. Neil Hulkauer, wine columnist for the World of Fine Wine magazine, for this review in the current issue. Quote, "A literate, literary tale of triumph. McLean's enviable gifts are on display. She bridges the gap between American brashness and British literacy and restraint. Her literate and literary writing informs and entertains with a blend of analytic detail and a healthy dose of humor, much of it self-effacing. Being able to amuse while recounting a trio of personal and professional blows without diluting or lessening the impact on the reader is a rare talent. Doing so was likely cathartic. Her beautiful prose tinged with pain is elevated with hard-earned wisdom." If you've read the book or are reading it, I'd love to hear from you at natalie@nataliemclean.com. If you don't have your copy yet or would like to support it and this podcast that I do on a voluntary basis, please order it from any online book retailer, no matter where you live. Every little bit helps spread the message. I'll put a link in the show notes to all retailers worldwide at nataliemclean.com/255. Coming up, I'll be hosting a wine tasting and book launch event at the Ottawa Writers Festival on Friday, October 27th at 6:30 p.m. 2 glasses of wine are included. Register at writersfestival.org. I'll also be hosting an event on Thursday, November 9th at 7 p.m. that you can attend no matter where you live. Treat yourself and your friends to a live online wine tasting and inspirational conversation with Menna Riley and yours truly about all things wine. I'll share the juicy behind-the-scenes stories about those who make, market, and write about wine. All you need to do to join this private online party is purchase wine from one of the following top-notch wineries: Quails Gate, Westcott Vineyards, or Benjamin Bridge. You can buy wine from all three or two of the wineries, your choice, but at least one. There is no event cost. All you need to do is get the wine. All three wineries ship across Canada right to your doorstep and will include a copy of the book. If you already have it, give it as a holiday gift, as I'll be sending out signed book plates for every copy. You'll also receive a Zoom link at the email address you used to buy the wine. Do you live outside Canada? You can still participate. Email me for details at at nataliemclean.com. So let's get you warmed up for your holiday season with this fun discussion and wine tasting. Make it a holiday gift to yourself. You deserve a treat. If you can't make the live event, don't worry. Everyone who registers will be sent a video recording after the event that you and your friends can watch and taste along with at your own convenience. Make that your holiday party. Please let your friends, family, and colleagues know about these events. I'll include links to both of them and the wineries in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/255. Okay, on with the show. All right, and just before I introduce my guest, just let me say that 3 of you are going to win a personally signed copy of her terrific new book, Vintage Crime, A Short History of Wine Fraud. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and tell me you want to win a copy. I'll choose 3 people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. In addition to her new book, Rebecca Gibb is the editor for the online publication Venus, covering the wines of New Zealand and the Loire Valley. In addition, she owns the wine and spirit jigsaw business. That's an unusual pairing that we'll have to ask her about, called Puzzle Crew. Rebecca is one of only 416 Masters of Wine in the world and was awarded the Outstanding Achievement Award and the Bollinger Medal in recognition of her superb tasting abilities. She lived in New Zealand for 6 years, but has since returned to the north of England, recently moving into the beautiful Lake District of the UK. That's where she joins us now from her home. Welcome, Rebecca. We're so glad to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here, especially when you tell me that you only have the most interesting people in the world. I'll take that as
yes,
very much some praise.
Yes, absolutely. You walk among them. You are one of them, Rebecca. And the Lake District. Oh, I love the Lake District. I studied the Romantic poets at Oxford, and we went up there to Grasmere for a conference in the summer. So you live in such a beautiful part of the world. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it's Wordsworth country, and I really like being in the outdoors. When I'm not thinking, talking, tasting wine, I like to be on the outdoors, so it's perfect for me.
Do you ever see 10,000 daffodils at a glance? Tossing their heads in sprightly dance?
Not yet, but maybe bring next spring. I'll let you know.
Next spring. Okay, good. Be on the watch for those. Okay. I get distracted easily. Before we dive into your wine career, tell us about representing Great Britain in the 100-meter hurdle event. So where were you and how old were you?
This was some time ago, 20-something plus years. Yeah, I was a hurdler back in the day. I was British champion, when I was 18, 19, after... Yeah,
wow.
I discovered I was quite good at hurdling when I was at school, and then decided to go down to the local track and started training, and one thing led to another. And yeah, I took it all the way and ended up representing Great Britain just the day after my A-level. So A-levels is sort of the equivalent of high school graduation. I was off to Germany to represent Great Britain. Sadly, I got really badly injured about a year later and have never gotten back to it, but I'm still really sporty and I still enjoy fitness. But yeah, no, I shan't be taking up hurdles again anytime soon.
Well, it's a good balance, that kind of healthy lifestyle as you're in the wine and food business. Now, you're a woman of many passions and interests. You also play the cello. So how did you get involved in that?
Yeah, my cello's sitting about 6 foot from me here. Just at school, we took some classes, and whoever seemed moderately musical got given an instrument, and my mother said that there was no way that I was going to play the violin because it sounded like a cat squalling when we were learning. So I got given a cello, which in retrospect wasn't the greatest idea because it's very difficult to transport. I mean, it's not as big as a double bass, but you do need a fairly sizable car to transport a cello. And my sister also played the tuba. So yeah, my parents had to buy a big car.
Wow. All the extra car seats there for the instruments alone. My goodness. And now, to round this out, you love penguins. Why?
Who doesn't love a penguin?
Okay. They're
There's
cute.
many reasons. They are cute. I love the way they waddle. And yet they are such great swimmers, so elegant in the water. And one of the things I really love about a penguin is that the male has to protect the egg when the woman goes off for a swim, which seems to me a really great idea.
Oh, I love that. They're so advanced, enlightened.
Yes. The man has to do the hard work.
Technically, yeah, absolutely. Are they birds, technically?
No, I
Are they
do watch David
mammals?
Attenborough, but I should know this. Well, they lay in the egg.
That's okay.
I don't know. Someone in the comments section can enlighten us on that one.
Exactly. Someone definitely will. And you're not here because you're a penguin expert, so let me keep the
No.
focus here. But I was touched in your book as we start to slide toward that. You decided to donate a portion of the book royalties to finding a cure for, is it Duchenne muscular dystrophy?
Yeah, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Yeah, it's actually personally affected me. So
Oh,
when
I'm sorry.
it happens. So when I submitted my manuscript for the book, final manuscript, somewhere June, July last year, or sort of melds into one now, my son started having some tests because he wasn't keeping up with his peers. He had these really enlarged calf muscles. So we thought maybe he just had a really tight Achilles, but it turned out he has actually Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which has been life-changing because it's a life-shortening disease and it's a muscle-wasting condition that affects young boys and that's incurable currently. But we're really touched by the Duchenne community here in the UK, and they've really supported us in understanding the disease better, trying to come to terms with that. So that's taken over our lives, really. So while I was in the editing process and sort of all sorting all out book covers and doing all this was really in the throes of just coming to terms with that. So I want to, make things better. So yeah, we've decided that I wanted to put a portion of my royalties, 10% of my royalties, to finding a cure or better treatments for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I've also set up a bit of a plug here, a sort of a Just Giving page, justgiving.com, Mac My Day. My son's called Macaulay. And we are just going to be raising funds over the next few years, just to try and, help other kids as well, because it isn't just us that's affected by it.
That is so admirable. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes and in the comments on the live stream for sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Kudos to you. All right, let's get into the book, Vintage Crime. What drew you to this story in the first place?
So, as some of you may know or may not know, I'm a Master of Wine. So I became a Master of Wine in 2015. And I passed my theory and my tasting exams back in 2011 and 2012. And then I was searching for a research paper topic. And I have a degree in history and politics and whatever you call it in the US, I majored in. And I just love history. And I thought, well, do you know what? That's my specialist subject. Been a journalist for 15, 20 years. It suits, I'm a researcher. It just naturally suits me. It's what I'm interested in. I'm going to have to study this for the next 6 to 12 months. It's basically like doing a master's thesis at uni. So I started looking around for a topic and I stumbled across a couple of stories in a book that it was scantily covered about riots in Champagne. I thought, this sounds quite interesting, a juicy story. And I thought, that's something I could get into. I speak French. I love to research. So I just started scratching the surface and realizing there was so little about it in the English language. And most of the information in French was narrative history. It didn't really get to grips with why it happened. So I took it on and I found out that one of the major reasons why the riots happened in Champagne in 1911 was because there was an awful lot of fraud going on, and people who were really growing the grapes and trying to make an honest living out of it were really struggling because they were basically being undercut by people who were making champagne that wasn't made from fruit that was grown in the region.
Wow, that's incredible. And we're going to dive into the champagne story in a bit, but that's great. And so why do you think that intrigued you at first, this champagne story? You wanted to find out why it was happening and more about it. But why do you think generally we drawn to tales of crime and greed and fraud? What is it about human nature that is fascinated with these stories?
I love wine. I'm a proper wine nerd, but I really love people too. And I love stories of people. And I love stories of people who are less than scrupulous. It's incredible how I have a moral compass, but it seems that a lot of people's moral compasses are slightly askew. There's a fearlessness to it. There's some sort of guile, but secretly you wonder, could I do it and get away with it too? I just think there's all that. I mean, we're fascinated by fraud. There's been so many Netflix series. There's been movies like Catch Me If You Can.
It's true.
People love a story about people trying to get one over on others.
Yeah, that's true.
And yeah, it's endlessly compelling.
And the number one wine podcast, I'm doing air quotes there, is called Wine Crime. But it's all about, I think it's two hosts discussing crime and murder mysteries as they drink wine. It's nothing to do with wine, but it's the number one wine podcast. So there you go. We are fascinated.
Yes.
And there's an acronym or something that you have talked about, MICE. What does that stand for?
Yes, that's commonly used to give a reason why people commit fraud. It's used by academics and such like. There's lots of different fraud things. There's often some descriptors about why people commit fraud. But yeah, MICE is a nice acronym that people can get their teeth into. MICE, money. People commit money. People commit fraud because, maybe they don't have enough money or maybe they want more. And then I think ideology. They really truly believe that they are doing something that they can do, or they can maybe get one over on others. And also they really enjoy doing it and they justify it to themselves. I'm doing this, but others do it too, or they justify their own crime. And that's sort of where the I in MICE comes from.
Oh, the system's unfair, so I'm going to get mine, whatever.
Yeah, I know.
I'm sure lots of justifications.
Totally. We all feel hard done by a lot of the time. So if they're doing why can't I sort of thing.
Sure.
See, coercion. Now, in some of the stories that I talk about in my book, it seems that there are people who end up as party to the crime. They don't want to be a part of it, but they're just sort of dragged along with it, or they're not the main actor, but they do become part of the crime. And that's sort of the coercion thing, that people are becoming involved. And then ego, If you can show off to a wine critic or a wine expert, a major auction house, that you've got a bottle of a chem and it isn't really a chem, and they believe it to be true, that can give your ego a boost, that you could actually get one over on another. And it propels you into perpetuating that crime. So you keep on doing it. It's sort of that ego boost, that sort of little, when you do exercise, you get the endorphin buzz. And for wine criminals, that seems to be the same.
Yeah, put one over on the critic, even they couldn't. And I would think ego plays a part too in some of the people who support these con artists, because they don't want to admit they were duped, or they like flying in these high circles, because when it comes to wine, the fraud is all at the top, the very expensive bottles. So I imagine there are some co-enablers involved in this whole thing in terms of why it works.
Absolutely. And that's one of the many reasons why wine fraud has been able to be committed in the past sort of 20 or 30 years, because there is that ego involved. People don't want to admit they have been duped. Particularly if wine fraud today is really occurring top echelons now, and they tend to be male, rich. They don't want to be seen to be wrong. There are a few people, which we talk about, like Bill Koch. He's probably got a record saying he was wrong, but it takes a lot to come out and say, you know what, I have been duped. Because,
right,
it makes you look a little stupid.
Yeah. Spending thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on fake goods, I'm sure. And why are you personally drawn to this dark side of wine? Have you done any therapy on that, Rebecca?
As I said before, I just find it really compelling. And I love I don't come from a natural wine background. My parents drank Liebfraumilch Milch when I was growing up. I don't come from that background. And I didn't go to private school. I just came from quite a humble background. And I don't come from I come from a working class background in the northeast of England, which is more steel and coal mining. So I don't come from a natural background. And I think that I've always kind of been a little bit left of field, left of centre. And I just find that what I really love reading about when it comes to wine, I don't love reading about rootstocks. And I don't love reading about how many hectares of Petit Verdot are planted. And I'm probably going to upset a lot of people here, but I don't really care whether it's sandy soil or it's silt. I do sometimes, but
I'm kidding. This crowd doesn't either.
Good.
It's all about the stories. That's why you're here. It's the stories about people.
I really connect with people. I've read so many boring wine books in my time that are perfect for the insomniac. And I was like, I want to write a wine book that people are actually put down and go, you know what, I really enjoyed that book, because that is such a rarity. Even when I'm writing, is to write piece that people get to the end. It doesn't have to be educational. I just want people to get to the end and have enjoyed it.
Right. Absolutely. And your book certainly does that. I finished it recently and it does read like a detective story. And yet it's all the more powerful because you realize this happened in real life. So these are real people, which gives it that extra edge. So yeah, absolutely. Well done.
Great. Thank you. I think it's also really important. I also want people who are not just wine people to read it.
Yes.
I hope that it extends to a wider audience who just like a bit of history.
Oh, definitely.
I think
Absolutely.
it's really important.
Anybody who's interested in people, basically, or human nature. Because I think, although, it's great to have happy stories and so on, but nothing is more fascinating than the dark side of human nature. It brings out so many contrasts, the extremes of humanity, if you will. So you've done a great job in capturing that. You do not have to be an expert or a wine person, to read it.
I love wine and I love history. I've always wanted to bring the two together. So to have this opportunity to do it is, a dream come true.
Yeah.
You know what? I may as well retire. Well, if I had enough money, I'd retire now. Hopefully, it'll be a New York Times bestseller.
Well, maybe you've learned all the techniques. You know what to do. Rebecca, just get some fake Petrus labels or whatever. Kidding. Just kidding.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you chronicle the history of wine fraud that goes back to the ancient times of Rome. What was the most popular method of deception back then?
Oh, popular method. There were lots of popular methods of deception, but it was tricky in the Roman times. I mean, it's really tricky because a lot of people love watering down was quite a common crime in bars. So they'd buy their wine and maybe they'd buy their wine, but then if a bar owner might then water it down more than he or she probably ought to have done.
Sure.
And yet that was considered, underhand behaviour. And yet it was common practice for Romans to water down their wine in the home. So it's I found the Roman period quite a tricky one in terms of just trying to discover what was considered normal practice or amelioration versus what was adulteration, because often the two were very similar. So
true. Right.
People might add water, and that considered amelioration. I think it's all to do with where the intent lies.
Yes.
Was there an intent to deceive?
Yeah.
People would add seawater, herbs, fenugreek. They would add honey to their wine quite commonly to make the wine taste better. Because let's face it, in this time, we didn't have stainless steel tanks. We weren't using SO2 to protect the wine from oxidation. Those techniques weren't around, so your wine soured quite quickly. So people were using these basically to mask the flavour of what was essentially sour wine.
Sure, absolutely.
Some people would do it intently in their homes. I might carry even like a sachet around with them to add to wine if they were on the road, on taverns. If you were going on a modern car journey, you would take your own additions to make your wine taste more to your palate. That was amelioration. It's making the wine taste better for you. But if it was done in a back office or something, there's a fine line between what's adulteration and what isn't. Tricky.
Sure. Transparency, I guess. Now, you mentioned that you're going to jump forward on the timeline because people have to get the book to get all the juicy details in between here. But you mentioned that Beethoven went deaf, perhaps due to, was it lead poisoning or lead doctoring in the wine?
Possibly. Beethoven loved to drink. Okay. So most of us will know that Beethoven became deaf during his lifetime. But many of us won't know that he suffered from really bad cramps. He was really grouchy. I mean, you'd probably be grouchy if you couldn't hear and you were a composer. But yeah, he was irritable, had like rheumatism. His health was really deteriorating. And there have been quite a lot of studies which have shown that actually it could have been one of the causes of his deafness and other medical ailments was lead poisoning, because at that time people were adding lead salts, or they were adding a thing called sapper or defrutum, which was basically reduced wine. It was sweet wine, but it would be boiled down in a lead-lined vessel. Therefore, it would pick up lots of lead in it, and that gave it like almost a sweet taste. And at this time, wines could sour quite easily, so that sweet taste would make a sour wine taste quite lovely. And he would drink wines from Hungary, he would drink wines from Germany, but I had quite a taste for port. And at that time, sort of late 1700s, early 1800s, like port there's quite a lot of lead in it, and it's definitely a reason why he could have been poisoned with lead. And There's a whole big story about this around his hair and his skull fragments. And yeah, just you have to read more in the Dying for a Drink chapter in my book. I'm not going to give it all away.
That's great. Oh, yeah. No. Nice teaser. Okay. So then in the late 1800s, I should say, when the vine root phylloxera killed off about 2 million hectares of vines, what odd methods did vintners try to do before they restored them? Now, this wasn't about fraud. I just found it amusing what they were doing to try to restore the vines. What did they do?
Cracking, isn't it? Yeah. So
Yeah.
it leads on to, I basically, just to contextualize this, I try to explain why my book is like a history of wine told through fraud. So one of the reasons that fraud occurred later on is because of the phylloxera and the lack of wine. So there was this huge lack of wine. So phylloxera hits French shores in the 1860s, and it takes its time to get going, and they don't know what's causing this. And we now know that if you graft an American rootstock to Vitis vinifera, you have resistance to phylloxera. That's common knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Not so common knowledge in the 1870s when it was really taking hold. So the French government gives out a reward for trying to find a solution for phylloxera.
Sure.
So people start suggesting things. So burying toads in the vineyard, that was suggested, ineffective.
Oh, poor
Spreading
toads.
volcanic dust, that was also ineffective. My favourite of all is having a marching band play in your vineyard. That is definitely the best one.
And it might be the closest to some vintners do today. They have music playing in it's more the barrel aging cellar rooms or whatever, but I could just see a marching band going down the rows, the vineyard rows.
I would love
I don't know.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they could record it then on their iPhones, so it's a shame, isn't it? But yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of the late 1880s, they did come to the fact that actually they had to put it on American rootstocks, but that wasn't that well received. It did take 20 or 30 years before it was really truly embedded.
Huh. Wow. Yeah, that would have been devastating because, as we know, it takes 5 to 7 years for a vine to come to maturity. So new plantings, even on rootstock, were going to take a while before they produce the fruit that create the wine. So there would be quite a gap in wine production. Now, during World War I, jumping ahead again, you note that 40% of vineyards, I think, in Champagne were destroyed, and yet there was more champagne sold than produced for a period of time. Something like 1 in 2 bottles were fake. Talk more about that.
So, where do we start? Phylloxera may have taken hold in France, sort of in parts of France, in the south of France, in the Languedoc, for example, in the 1860s. But it didn't really hit Champagne. First recordings of phylloxera in Champagne happened in 1892. So actually, it was actually quite slow to take hold. So it's actually like the early noughties and the tens of the 1900s where it's actually starting to take hold. Now, so people are having to replant at this time. They're having bad harvests. So there's not a lot of fruit going around. And yet Champagne's becoming really popular at this time. You know, you've seen lots of posters, some people's walls now, postcards from the Champagne period. This is time that champagne marketing's really getting going. People couldn't get enough of champagne. There wasn't enough to go around. So what do? You truck in wine from the Languedoc, or you truck in wine from the Loire, and it arrives into the station in Epinay, for example, as a Loire wine. It goes into your cellar, comes out as a sparkling wine that has a champagne label on it.
Magic.
Yeah, it is magic, isn't it? And at this time, the laws are still starting to come together on this. Obviously, this is not good news to the people who have just recently replanted and spent all their life savings, if they had any, on replanting their vineyards or taking out huge bank loans. Then they've got what grapes they have are the grape prices are being depressed. So people are pretty peeved about this. So they head out into the streets, shout down with fraud. They also are asking for, they're asking for bread. Simply, they can't feed their families because they're not making ends meet.
And thus the Champagne riots. And it got so bad that they were jailing children as young as 12 for stealing wine. Like they were clamping down on everything fraudulent.
Well, the French army is stationed in Epinay and around that area, so around area Champagne, to keep the peace. And yeah, they clamped down, basically. They clamped down on stealing. The riots happen. Wine goes down the street. Champagne houses go up in flames. There's general looting. I think I'll have to verify this. I think that some child gets jailed for like stealing one single bottle of wine and some matches. It's, yeah.
Wow.
That a lot of people are, they're let go, but, they're arrested, but they don't get sentenced.
Is this when Roederer, who produces that coveted cult champagne Cristal that the rappers have shouted out and so on, is this when they hire a full-time fraud detective?
Do you know what? I'm going to have to find out, because that is something I have not heard about. But yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Well, they had a serious investment in detecting fraud for sure.
Ooh.
I just imagine a gumshoe detective, but in his office desk is a Cristal bottle, not the old whiskey. Anyway, that's just my runaway imagination. But there's some very creative ingredients that have been added to wine. You talk about rehydrating raisins and trucking up cheap wine, of course, at night. But how did blueberries from Norway get into, was it Burgundy?
Wow. How did they get? Yes. Well, I mean, we love to see like mise en bouteille à la propriété these days in French wine, for example. The wine has been bottled at the property, but it didn't used to be bottled at the property. That's like Burgundy. That's like the starts of that's like 1930s and 40s, where people start really bottling at the property. Wine would be sent in barrels, large barrels, to port. It would be sent to a merchant, and it could end up in anything. And Norwegian blueberries are really deeply coloured, as any blueberries are, really. So yeah,
sure.
So if your wine is lacking in colour and your customer wants a wine that's deep in colour, yeah, throw a few blueberries
Give
in.
them what they want.
Stick them in that. There you go.
And I just have to ask, I don't know if this is even in chronological order, but there was a label created called Cat on an Egg, but it was the French version. What was that?
So there's a whole chapter dedicated to how the appellations come about in the 1936, and the leading appellation that's occurring is Châteauneuf du Pape. And they were really stringent even before the appellation system was created. You can read about this in the book, but fighter pilot, war hero turned lawyer becomes the protector of Châteauneuf du Pape. And so they had these really stringent laws in place even before 1936. And once 1936, they were one of the first appellations to become an appellation, for want of a better word. But yeah, then you see the critter labels comes along in the 90s. You see like Goats do Robe. You remember like Kangaroo.
Well, yeah, Fairview Wines from South Africa had Goats do Robe. They still do, actually. Surprised that they still have it.
So critter labels come about. You see kangaroos on Australian wines, that sort of thing. And in that sort of period, along comes a chat on earth. So a cat on an egg.
Chateauneuf. Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Yes. So you can imagine the people of Chateauneuf, who have such a strong history in protecting their village. They weren't best pleased about that. So, yeah, they were given a cease and desist letter.
Oh, and did they comply? Did they take it off the market, that you know?
The Chateauneuf brand name sort of was given the heave-ho, but the brand that replaced it, there's still a cat on an egg.
Defiant.
Yeah, get yourself to Britain, can you have a cat on an egg? Perfect.
That's
perfect
great.
when paired with cat food.
Oh, yeah. Something's got to perk that up. But like wine fraud has become so mainstream. The Simpsons, of course, which picks up on a lot of leading cultural trends before they're actual trends. What was the story on the Simpsons episode about wine fraud?
Ah, the Simpsons. Yes. What?
Yes.
You don't expect to read about that in a wine book, do you? No. This is the very nature of my book. So it's the first series of Simpsons. This is in like 1990. I'm still at primary school then, so I do not obviously realise the cultural significance of this yet. There's an episode called The Grapes of Wrath. And I always only became aware of this episode when I went for my coffee at my local coffee shop. And who's like, I know the guy now who works there and who owns it. And I'm talking to him about my book that I'm writing. And he's like, Antifreeze, this Austrian wine scandal. He's like, do you know about the Simpsons episode? And I'm like, no. So I go, watch it. Anyway, so Grapes of Wrath, Bart gets sent off to France on a French exchange as a punishment for basically blowing up a toilet when Principal Skinner's mother is sitting on it. Anyway, bad timing. So he goes off to do a French exchange, but he doesn't get put with a lovely family. I didn't get put with a lovely family in my French exchange either. Anyway, I digress. He ends up with these two winemakers who are unscrupulous, the owners of Chateau Maison, and they're adding antifreeze to their wine anyway. They make Bart drink it, and he really doesn't want to do it because he's seen that they've put antifreeze in it. It doesn't poison him, so they're like, oh, we can do this, so let's carry on. The long and short is that Bart tells a police officer what's going on. He tells them that he's being mistreated. He has to sleep in the donkey stable, and he tells adding antifreeze to wine. And then the police officer's like, antifreeze to wine? This is a scandal. They get arrested.
He picks up on that.
He goes back to the US a hero.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Rebecca. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, I enjoyed Rebecca's stories about the greatest con artists in the world of wine. I think we all love a juicy story about people trying to get one over on others. Call it whatever you will. Maybe it's the wine version of Schadenfreude. 2, I agree that part of what helps con artists get away with what they do is that people don't want to admit they've been duped. That's pride, and that's human nature. And number 3, I was intrigued by the creative but illegal ingredients that have been added to wine to cut costs and boost profits. There is a fine line between what's adulteration and what isn't. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of my conversation with Rebecca, links to her website and books, the video versions of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live, and where you can order my book online now, no matter where you live, as well as links to my upcoming wine tasting and book launch events. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/255. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or if you've read my book or are in the process of reading it at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. I would love to hear from you. If you missed episode 1, go back and take a listen. I chat with author Pete Hellman about the shadow world of wine forgery in Vino Duplicatus. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
There was a book in 1960, came out in 1960, I think, by maybe an anthropologist named David Moore. It was called The Big Con, and he followed around master swindlers, con men, who would strike up conversations with strangers, and before long, they had the strangers' money. David Moore says the one thing that he learned from all these master con men was they're very proud. They do not take anyone's money. You thrust it into their hands. That's what Madoff did. People begged him to take their money and invest it. And people basically begged Rudy for these mythic vintages that nobody else could supply. You want an 1867 Chateau Lafite or Latour? Rudy could get it for you. He had it. And he had a backstory as to where he could get these wines, which was plausible. But in the end, he was just a real con man. And he lied the way you and I hopefully tell the truth.
If you liked this episode, please email or tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wines, tips, and stories we shared. You won't want to miss next week when we continue our chat with Rebecca Gibb. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a tasty wine that you came by honestly. I'm kidding, of course. I'm sure all your wines are honest ones and honestly begotten, or however you say that. Cheers. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.